Badasses in Tech is brought to you by Growth Stack Media. If you're looking to scale your business affordably through public relations, video production, or podcasting, we've got you covered. Visit growthstackmedia.com to get in touch today.
From as long as I can remember, I have loved math and art, and also music. I was the second of 4 daughters, and my parents, who were from very different backgrounds, they met during World War II. My mother, grew up as the oldest daughter of the manse. Her father was a hell and damnation Presbyterian minister. My father grew up in Poland, did his education in high school and university in France, and then was put in a concentration camp in Poland, escaped, managed over 2 years to get to the south of France and start fighting there, and then got wounded and was sent. They sent Polish officers fighting with the Free French to Scotland to recuperate, and that's how he met my mother. So when they were intending to have 2 children, and when I arrived, I was my father's son. It was just completely clear. I thought I was a boy. He thought I was a boy. And they ended up having 2 more children that weren't planned, but I had that role. And there were lots of things that were really good about that. One of them was that he believed I could do absolutely anything. And in those days, I was born in 1951, girls were not supposed to be good at math. They weren't supposed to play the trumpet. They weren't particularly supposed to be artists. And my father just encouraged me and all of those kinds of things. And so I feel like I owe a lot of my success as being the first woman to hold my position, the support that I got from my father. Now, I'll just say that when I became a little bit older and, started university in Canada, you go to your local university for undergraduate stuff. And I became involved in student protests and so on and so forth. And he definitely didn't like that. And I was not quite 18 when they disowned me. And it's, I think it was also very important for me to establish to be able to establish a different set of expectations for who I wanted. And I think for me, the really hard parts were that I really loved pure mathematics, but I didn't understand how you could possibly make a difference in the world with pure mathematics. So I actually dropped out of college in the middle of my 3rd year, not because I was doing badly. I was doing extremely well, but I wanted to travel the world and think about, the kind of impact that I wanted to have. And what I discovered by leaving mathematics was I don't want to live without mathematics. And so eventually I came to the conclusion that the easiest way to combine my passion for mathematics and my desire to make the world better would be to focus my attention on increasing diversity in STEM fields where there weren't a lot of women nor people of color or any of those kinds of things. So that's sort of the way that I found the intersection of my desires in life. And it has ended up, I feel incredibly lucky that I've had a career where I've been able to do the things I really love throughout my life. So it was very important to me that I have children.
Yeah.
Both of our children are very successful. We refer to them as the new improved models of their parents.
Oh.
Our son is a math computer science geek. Our daughter is a peace negotiator. And, probably when she was about 17 or 18, she said, "Mom, this stuff you do with diversity in STEM, it's not all that important. I'm going to do something important with my life." And I'm going, "So what are you thinking of?" And she goes, "Care in developing countries, maybe peace negotiations." And she is doing peace negotiations and it's having a lot of impact.
Yeah. It's almost like the confidence and the grit and the resilience that your father passed down to you is going down to your generation, your children and that second generation. So it's a beautiful story. And what I'm hearing throughout multiple seasons of your life and all of the different kind of evolutions of your career and how you grew up, you were defying a lot of odds, being that first female in multiple organizations, and even having all of that responsibility at such a young age. And even what you're mentioning, doing the protests and even leaving mathematics for a bit. So it's a bold way of living. And I feel like a lot of us, myself included, we hesitate to find that boundary. We hesitate to defy those odds. So I'm curious if you have, whether it's a mindset or a thought process or a formula that as you were encountering all of those experiences, how did you push yourself to continue tapping into what you knew you wanted to do despite what maybe society was doing or what everyone was kind of telling you to do?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So
yeah.
When I went to Princeton as Dean of Engineering, I found one of the reasons I left UBC. So we moved back to UBC we moved to UBC when our children were 3 and 6. And that's because I wanted them to go to public schools. I wanted them to go to school in French immersion. And I wanted to be close to my parents. And we had 14 and a half wonderful years in Vancouver, which is my favorite city in the world. And we built a fantastic computer science department at the University of British Columbia, which was the main reason I took the position as head of computer science there. And, it was a really wonderful experience. But one of the things I realized, we had, when I was dean of science there, which was my final position before leaving, one of the things I'd really focused on was getting more women into faculty positions. And so, for example, we were able to take the math department from 2 out of probably 55 faculty members being female to 7 in 4 years. And I was giving a talk about this at the National Academies in DC, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, but Canada's a kinder, gentler country. Of course you could do it there. So one of the things I decided from that at that point was I had to move back to the US, and I had to go to a showcase institution. And what I absolutely didn't, I think, really take into account was the reluctance of a very successful university like Princeton to change, or to change quickly. So there was one day when I was, our son was there as a graduate student in computer science at the same time, and was over at our place for dinner. And I came back being really frustrated, saying, why do I have to always run into brick walls?
Yeah.
And he goes, Mom, somebody has to make all the mistakes that others can learn from.
What a sweet boy.
Well, he was sort of being funny, but sort of serious. And it is definitely true. So I often talk about fail openly and often. Why should you fail openly and often? Well, first of all, if you're not failing, you're not aiming high enough. And the whole point about failing often and openly is that you make it okay for other people to aim high and not succeed. And I'll just say that, I lived most of my life feeling like a total failure. That's just who I am. And it doesn't stop me from trying to do things that I think are really important. And I've decided that having the imposter syndrome, which even though many other people think you be extremely successful, but you see yourself more in terms of what you're failing to do than what you're actually achieving, that's actually a recipe for success.
Great.
And it's a recipe, and I cannot tell you how many people, very, very successful, famous people I know, that see themselves this way. And the reason it's a recipe for success is if you look at something and you didn't achieve as much as you hoped for, you learn from it. You learn so much more from failure than from success. And so, I think it's very, very common that if you have high expectations for yourself, that you feel like you haven't met them. And one of the things that I started doing when I was president of Harvey Mudd was at Convocation, which is an event that's the first day of classes in the fall semester. I would talk about the imposter syndrome and also talk about how to overcome it, like ways to cope with that sense of failure and not being sure that, you're going to succeed. And I would always ask the students, because one of the things about Harvey Mudd is it's an extremely challenging curriculum, highly collaborative, wonderfully helpful students and faculty and staff, but it's really hard. And it's really common for students to show up and say, oh, admissions must have made a mistake. I'm just not nearly smart or as prepared or whatever as other students here. So one of the things that I would say is towards the end of my 5-minute talk, I would ask people to raise their hand if they felt like an imposter. And, more than half of the students, yes, would raise their hand. But by the time I'd been doing this for a few years, more than half of the faculty would raise their hands too.
Right.
So, I think the whole idea is to make it okay to face challenge and to feel challenged and to understand that challenge is how you grow.
Yeah.
And perseverance is simply, and feeling like a failure is just all part of the success process.
Totally. And I feel like you have to feel that sense of, like, when I feel that failure feeling, I feel it in my gut. It's like a sinking feeling. I'd almost like my stomach is turning. And as bad and uncomfortable as that feeling feels, to your point about using that as a learning, when I smash something or feel really good about something, it almost makes that feeling 10 times better. Do you know what I mean? Like
sure.
That feeling of smashing it, you're like, oh, finally, I got this. After all of those feelings of uncertainty and maybe even embarrassment and fear and frustration and anger. Wow, this feels good. And not only did I accomplish what I was set to do, maybe it wasn't exactly on the timeline I initially planned, or maybe it wasn't the step-by-step process that I thought. I got it done. And to your point, I've learned so much more about this project, this field, this industry, myself, my team. So I love that. I think that's such wonderful advice. And everyone I talk to has a level of feeling like a failure, feeling like an imposter. So I know there's a lot of listeners out there who will take what you're saying and run with it. Something else you mentioned is the notion of collaboration, right? So whether it's in school or whether it's taking a brand new project from your company and trying to push a new way of thinking or a new tool, or you're trying to push boundaries and trying to break break barriers, break walls. I just completely lost my train of thought there. 1 second. Oh, I was going somewhere with that. Oh, the collaboration.
Exactly.
Tell me. Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about how to effectively change the world.
Yeah.
And particularly about how to change culture.
Right.
Culture. My CIO at Harvey Mudd, Joseph Vaughn, always used to say, culture eats strategy for lunch every single day. Like changing culture is just one of the hardest things to do. And yet it's incredibly important. And so one of the things I talk about a lot is how important it is to connect with people in different networks and help them achieve their goals. Because that's how we actually do change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I would say is that the outsider voice in a network often gets heard much more clearly and more easily than the insider voice. So, for example, when I first moved to Harvey Mudd, one of the reasons I was interested in the presidency there was that the faculty there had a phenomenal history of innovation in pedagogy and curriculum. And the curriculum, as I mentioned, was extremely challenging. Now, it wasn't a very diverse college when I arrived. It was 70% white and 70% male in the student body, and fairly similar in the faculty.
Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you haven't already, why don't you take a second to click follow or subscribe on the platform you're tuning into so that you won't miss a second of Badasses in Tech. Also, if you're really loving what you're hearing today, why don't you drop us a 5-star review or leave us a positive comment, as it really helps the podcast grow and helps us continue doing what we're doing, which is helping people become a badass.
So I had forgotten to ask whether they were interested in diversifying the college. And it turned out that they weren't so interested. We were starting strategic planning, which was something the board wanted to happen. And I managed to convince Freeman Horowski, who at that point was the president at UMBC, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, to come and be a keynote speaker on our third day of strategic planning workshops. And Freeman at that point was the first Black scientist or mathematician to be president of an R1 university, or top research university. And I had diversity on the sort of topics for the breakout sessions in strategic planning on every day of the 4 days of the workshops. And I had been a little discouraged by hearing so many students and faculty and others say, oh, the reason we have so few women and people of color here, that's just because they're not interested in a rigorous STEM education. And I'm like, ugh. So then Freeman gives this talk, the first thing on the third day workshop. And he talks about being, a teenager or maybe preteen and marching with Martin Luther King and what that meant to him. And people were literally in tears. And in the breakout sessions on diversity that day, people were saying, we can do this. We can attract more women and people of color. We can have them succeed here. It's possible. And so one of the parts of our strategic plan was unsurpassed excellence and diversity at all. And lo and behold, Harvey Mudd, by the time I'd been there I was there for 17 years in total as president. By the time I'd been there for about 10 years, we were 50% female in every major.
That's awesome.
And by the time I left, we were one of the racially most diverse colleges in the country.
That's wonderful. I mean, Talk about impact.
Mm-hmm. And what I'll say is that, of course, presidents have a role, but they don't actually do the hard work. It's really the community that does the hard work. And it's because we were able to convince the community that this was something they really valued and something we wanted to have happen. And it happened.
Yeah. Would you say for others that are trying to make an impact and, again, kind of change the culture, what was the factor that you think moved the needle between those days? Was it hearing that emotional testimony from the speaker, or what do you think were the ingredients?
It was having an outsider
Yeah.
come and say things. Because, of course, I was saying things.
Right.
some other faculty were saying things, some other board members were saying things.
Yeah.
But it was this outsider who was really doing it. So the other thing I've encountered frequently is, so having an outsider who can come and say things that will be heard, it will be heard more clearly. It will be taken more seriously. So if you're having trouble changing something in your organization, see if you can get somebody who's well known to come and give a talk about it, because it really helps when it's not you. The other thing I've encountered over and over again is something I call first wave, second wave. So the first person who suggests changing something, even if it makes total sense, is often people just fight it. Change is hard. A year later, a couple of years later, someone comes along and suggests exactly the same thing. And everyone goes, oh yeah, we can do that. So it's just this really weird thing that when you are the proponent of change and you're the first person doing it, a lot of people are finding reasons why they just can't agree with you. And you get blamed on being too outspoken, too pushy, too unreasonable, too something, impatient. And then the next person comes along with essentially exactly the same ideas, but let's say a year or two later, and everyone says, oh, that's such a good idea. And the way I discovered this was, so I've been the first wave many times, but when I went to the University of British Columbia to be the head of the computer science department, I was the second wave. The first wave had been the person who immediately preceded me as head of the department. And he had then become the director of an interdisciplinary institute that included computer science and electromechanical engineering. And he was one of the people who recruited me to UBC. And it was very interesting to me that I would talk to him about the fact that I was planning to do something, and he'd say, that'll never work. And I just got very irritated that he was so discouraging. And eventually I figured it out. He had tried exactly that, and it didn't work. And of course, I came along and tried it, and it did work. And that's when I learned about being second wave. And I took him out for lunch at the end of my first year, and I apologized to him. I said, Jim, I know you were really trying to be helpful. And I had no idea that this could really happen, that somebody with the best of all intentions could get such feedback. And then just because somebody else came along a year or two later, they got all the credit.
Okay, so that opens up a whole other side of this, right? And going back to your collaboration component and kind of building on others' successes and achievements, how would you recommend folks tracking the impact? Are there different factors or questions that you ask yourself or the team on an ongoing basis? Like how do you over time track the impact of a new idea or a new solution or some of the things that you've kind of implemented along your journey?
So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So right now, as president of Maths for America, one of my main objectives, so there's a small staff, 23 people, and then there are close to 1,000 teachers who are supported in this program. Those are public school teachers in New York City, and they are math and science teachers, primarily at high school, but also junior high and elementary. And they apply for a fellowship, and they have to be already a great teacher to be selected as a fellow. And we give them an additional stipend of $15,000 per year for 4 years. And in exchange, they do professional development for themselves, for other teachers. And as true at many small organizations, the pandemic was really hard. And so when I arrived, one of the things so I did a one-on-one meeting with each person on the staff, not the close to 1,000 teachers, but with 20-some staff people. And I just wanted to know, how long have you been here for? What are you doing? What did you do before you came here? What do you love about Math for America? What would you change if you had a magic wand? Okay, so the magic wand question is one that I have used throughout my career because it allows people to criticize something without expecting that it's necessarily going to change. Because the magic wand implies, like at Mudd, I would do these dinners for first-year students, and I would ask them, as we're eating dessert, I'd ask them, what would you change? What do you love most? What you had a magic wand? And they would say things like, well, I really miss seeing my parents on a regular basis, and they're in Vermont. So I wish there were a 20-minute flight or car journey to Vermont. Clearly not going to happen. So anyway, I had that set of conversations, and basically the thing I think I heard most often is the staff really wanted to feel trusted, heard, respected. And, the pandemic was really hard. There were some bumps coming back from the pandemic, et cetera. And of course, if for whatever reason, trust has been lost, it takes time to rebuild. So I've been in this job now for 7 months. And so I think the way I'm tracking whether or not having impact and whether things are getting better is I'm talking both to individual staff members, but also to the COO and CFO who report to the president, because I think they really have a sense of what's going on. And what I'm hearing is, we're actually really making progress. People are starting to feel much better. And, eventually we will probably do a climate survey and, other kinds of things like that. But often I find out the best way to track something is just talk to people about what they think is happening. And we just had earlier this week, Tuesday, today's Thursday, we had our board meeting. And, one of the things that we elected a new board chair and a new board vice chair, as well as 4 brand new members to the board. And this is all just part of, I think at a lot of organizations, you got through the pandemic and then you sort of rebuilding, just trying to get back to sort of a normal way of functioning. And then now we're far enough past the pandemic, it's time to actually refresh. So that's what we're doing. And, but I also notice things that people are starting to come and talk to me about stuff that they definitely weren't doing before. Asking us to do things differently. And we're trying out doing things. So, this whole idea of trying to create an environment where people feel that it's safe to suggest things, that it's okay to ask things, that it's okay for us to say no to things too, but just not to make somebody feel badly for asking.
Yeah. And it sounds like by you opening up that channel of communication, not only were you able to get the intel and the feedback that you needed to kind of create the strategy or create the goals, you were also able to then kind of show the students or whoever you were working with, like, it's safe. So there was this beautiful cycle of getting the intel, creating that safe space, and also encouraging that trust and creating that environment for trust. So I think that's a really important piece of what you're talking about, like if I'm thinking of like a blueprint, if you would, of not being afraid, obviously, but not being afraid of opening up those lines of communication. Don't worry that if you might get a ton of criticism or maybe like negative feedback, it's okay. Welcome that, and then do what you can to, let those people know we're working on it, or we're taking what you're saying and we're going to create a whole new program or a whole new process. So I think that's so important what you're saying. And I'd love to I have a few more questions. I'd love to kind of pivot a little bit. So you mentioned at the top, and we have this beautiful painting behind you. I love the field of STEM that you're in, because we're starting to see this beautiful intersection of technology, math, and now art. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that and anything kind of that you're seeing from your perspective that might be worth talking about, and maybe helping those who might be interested in joining STEM have a little bit of an inside scoop on maybe how to play up their talents and their strengths.
Well, I will say that, so I've been a painter my entire life. And being the first woman in my role for such a long time, other than my very close friends and my family, nobody knew that I was an artist. Because I thought, it's very bad enough being female. What are they gonna think I'm a complete flake if they know I'm an artist. So then on my 40th birthday, and I'm now 72 I'll be 73 next month, I came out of the closet. I hung paintings both in my office and in our house. And then eventually I got to the point where I actually started painting in meetings. And turns out that I'm a much better participant in a meeting if I'm painting, because it stops me from talking too much. So the particular painting that's behind me is called Reassembly Required. And this came about because at the beginning of my second year as President Mudd, I heard from some faculty that they didn't like my style as president. And I ended up working with an executive coach, Sabina Nawaz, who's totally fantastic. And Sabina said to me, I'm going to suggest a number of things for you to do. What she actually did was, rather than tell me to do anything, she had me read a bunch of leadership style books, and then had me put together an action plan for how I was going to change my style in interacting with faculty members. And she said, Maria, this is going to be painful working through this. So I want you to do a painting and let all of your emotions come out in the painting so they don't come out in your work as president. So this is the painting. So first of all, I painted 7 self-portraits in slightly different colors. And then you can see that at one end of the painting, I'm happy, and then it's like my face blows up and then gradually comes back together. And there's a lot of sort of birds of paradise, and geometric shapes and all that kind of stuff. And my son came and looked at it, and he said, it's an awful lot better if you read it in the opposite direction. Here you are really decomposed, and then you're coming back together, and there you are really happy. So it was in the president's house at Harvey Mudd, and it was hung opposite a mirror, so that you could read it either way, whichever way you wanted to. And but it is one of my favorite paintings, and I think that the changes I made based on what I learned from the executive coaching is one of the best things that happened to me. Yes, it was definitely painful, because, I had always been so proud of being very open and outspoken and this, that, and the other. And essentially what I was being asked to learn was that there were occasions where that wasn't the best interaction for some of the faculty. And so that I needed to listen until the full stop, never interrupt anyone. I needed to actively confirm that I'd heard what they said. Am I right in thinking that you told me that, etc.? I needed to not respond quickly. And I've always been someone who processes stuff very quickly and often interrupts because I already know what the end of the sentence is, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but that's just not the best way to be in that particular context. And so I really did change, and it was sufficiently successful that many faculty members came up to me and said, we can see the difference. We really appreciate that you did this. And the way I describe it is I had to learn to be the president they needed, not the president I wanted to be. And I think that's a very important thing in leadership roles, that it's not about you, it's about your organization.
Absolutely. And figuring out how does that organization tip. I love what you're saying too. And I need that feedback. Like, I need that advice as well. I love to just anticipate what other people are going to say. And that gets on everyone's nerves. Like, even myself, I get on my own nerves. And to your point about that maybe being something that's needed in a certain environment might not be required or even necessary in other scenarios or environments. So again, just being open to learning not only how you operate, but how does your closest kind of circle of team members or employees or folks that you're managing, how do they prefer to work? I have a bunch of just best practices that I like to use when I'm interacting with a new group of people, or if I'm kind of refreshing my own way of working, and really making it a point to understand, how does this person like to communicate? Are they what I call bullet point communicators? They just want the facts, the quick points, or do they want all the details? Like, what about which preference is going to make this individual the most comfortable? And then, does this person, how do they like to collaborate? Is it, let's meet once a week face to face and hash things out together? Or do you want to work independently and then we come together? And I feel like that work is so important, like you're saying, but we neglect that when we're first joining something, or when we're, again, like trying to refresh things, because we're so focused on how we want that end goal to look like, but we're missing the most important piece, which is really getting everybody activated to bring everyone along that journey and reach that final end goal. So yeah, whatever books that she had you read, please send them to me and I'll share them with our listeners, because yeah, it's one of my biggest points I'm working through. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. So I think what was really helpful, so I read about 5 books, and they had very different sort of approaches to doing things. And it was good to learn different approaches, because I really think that there are often many ways of solving a problem. Of course, what we want is to find a solution that people feel comfortable with and that they have ownership of. So, one of the things that I'm very proud of at Princeton is we did the strategic plan. And it was, we created a whole new way of doing a strategic plan, because the previous dean had done a strategic plan that was not successful. And so when I had arrived as dean and said, we're going to do a strategic plan, everyone's going, been there, done that. Nope. And so I worked with a group of people, about 6 people, to actually come up with a completely different kind of process that everybody was invited to participate. I mean, you could come in and off the street and participate. There were trustees, there were Nobel laureates, there were first-year students, there were staff. And it was the first time that staff and students had ever been invited to participate in anything like this.
Yeah.
And so what happened was Princeton, I was pretty sure that I was going to go be president of someplace like Michigan or Yale or whatever. And so when I was interested in going to Harvey Mudd, they were just, sort of like, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. Why would you do that? And because Harvey Mudd was not that well known at that point. And I just said, I'm very passionate about diversity in STEM, and I want to go to a place that really cares about education and teaching to prove that it's possible that women and people of color can thrive. And they were just like, I couldn't believe that I would do that. And so then the department chairs in the engineering school went to the provost and president and said, this is our strategic plan. You can't hire an external dean of engineering because they'll want to do a different strategic plan. And we did this one and it's ours, and you mess with it. And the provost said, no, we always do external searches. Well, they didn't. They hired an internal person. They stayed on that strategic plan for more than 10 years.
Wow.
And I often think that I had far more impact on Princeton by leaving after 3.5 years than I could have possibly had by staying. So it's always important when you're thinking about what you're doing, that there are very complicated ways that you can influence outcomes. And, it's interesting. A number of trustees met with me probably 7 or 8 years after I'd left, so Princeton trustees, and said, we've seen what you've done at Harvey Mudd, and we totally understand why you left. We're really proud of you. So what I think about all the time is, how do you have the most impact? How do you help others to have the most impact? And I guess one more piece of advice I'll give is that when I went to Mudd, I noticed that the students were very collaborative. And so as president, I started talking about the things that I thought were the most important ingredients for Mudd's impact in the world. And one of them was collaboration. So at Mudd, the value system is it's every student's responsibility to help every other student succeed. There's no competition for grades. That's just the way it is. And the faculty care more about the successes of their students. And I don't mean in the classroom, I mean the successes of their students in growing up into being people who make a difference in the world than they care about their own careers. I've never seen that before. And one of the things I learned is that the more that I emphasized this, the more it happened. And so one of the things that I would tell every young person and every old person and everyone in between is that the things that you express gratitude for and appreciation for, no matter how junior you are or how senior you are, that has real impact. So, for example, I would often tell students, it's not very often that a student comes up to a faculty member and tells them that was a fantastic homework assignment, or that was a fantastic lecture, or I just loved how you did X, Y, or Z. And because it doesn't happen all that often, it has a huge impact. So there's this, I often think that you can have much more impact on changing an environment in a positive way by what you praise and what you celebrate than what you criticize.
So true. So true. Like you're saying, celebrating those small wins, vocalizing them often, and using your voice, and just focusing on not being afraid to fail, not being afraid to, maybe say the wrong thing, so you're not going to say it at all, or I'm not going to give that piece of feedback, positive or negative, because I don't know who to give it to, or I don't know how it's going to impact my job stability. There's so many questions and hesitancies that swirl around. So I love that. And it's been so wonderful talking to you, Maria. I've learned so much in this 45 minutes than I was can't even imagine. And I'm very excited to get this podcast episode out to all of our listeners. Before I let you go, I know that, you recently just joined Math for America, but let's hear a little bit about kind of what you have plans for and what's next for Maria, and where can my listeners find you?
Well, so first of all, one of the things I'm super excited about is that the National Science Foundation, like one of the reasons I took this role was I think celebrating teachers, recognizing teachers is so important, whether we're celebrating them in elementary school or advisors of graduate students, that this encouragement and inspiration of people to learn to love a subject is just really important. And Jim and Marilyn Simons had this dream about really recognizing great math and science teachers within New York City. And it was always their dream that this in fact became a national program that received federal funding. Not the one in New York City. They fund it very generously, but that there be a national program. And so I actually was on the board of Math for America for 15 years before coming as president. And that's because together with a small number of other people, we founded Math for America in Los Angeles. And it one of the reasons I wanted to come was Congress had approved funding for a national program in the CHIPS Act, which passed a little bit less than 2 years ago. And the National Science Foundation announced their STEM teacher corps last week, and we are absolutely thrilled. So yeah, it is totally wonderful. The other thing I'll just say is there's another reason why we wanted to move to New York City. Our son is here and has 3 children. And today I'm wearing teal, which is one of the favorite colors of our granddaughter. And we are about to go pick her up and take her out to Long Island to our house in Freeport. And one of the joys, when my children were small, I loved teaching them both math and art. And I love teaching our grandchildren. Zia is the youngest. She's only 6 months, so I'm not trying to teach her art or math yet.
She's got a little time.
Yeah. I'm having lots of fun with Sarah and Zane. So
I bet.
I think, there are certain things I wanted with my life. I wanted to be able to have children. I wanted to have a partner with whom I could really celebrate life. And I'm married for 44 years to another mathematician / computer scientist, Nick Rippinger. Has been totally wonderful. So where can they hear me? My favorite things is Nova did a program on the secret lives of scientists. This is maybe at least 10 years ago now. And the one about me is called The Proof is in the Painting.
Badasses in Tech is brought to you by Growth Stack Media. If you're looking to scale your business affordably through public relations, video production, or podcasting, we've got you covered. Visit growthstackmedia.com to get in touch today.